In this episode of Idea City.
To me, it's a sensational question. If you think this is 2,000 years of tradition that we're looking at, the question is this: can it be, is there evidence, can we establish that there ever was a historical Jesus of Nazareth? That's the project, the Jesus Project. You can Google it. 50 distinguished scholars are going to take 5 years.
Idea City, the smartest people, the biggest ideas.
Our next speaker is Tom Harper. Tom Harper is well known in these parts. He has, in his varied career, spent 7 years as a parish priest. Then he was a professor of the New Testament. Following that, he worked as a journalist, as an editor in the area of ethics, spirituality, and religion. And he says, never mind. You don't read the Bible literally. And that the only way to reconcile all the competing faiths in a genuinely pluralistic society is to embrace what he calls a rational cosmic faith. Tom, would you come up here? Thank you.
It really is a very great honor to be on this platform and to be able to take part in what is, I think, an amazing event. Because our minds are being stretched in all kinds of directions today. I'm an Anglican by background, though I'm not sure they are particularly keen to own me. But I was, after the publication of the Pagan Christ, there was some controversy, not to mention some acrimony. And I was speaking at an Anglican church I was in London, Ontario. And Anglicans, whatever may be said bad about them, are kind of a mild and nice people, low-key, a little smug perhaps. They sort of have the view there may be other ways to God, but no gentleman would really take them. But I went sort of innocently along, and when my wife and I drove up to the corner, it was a large church on a large corner in London, there was a huge sign on the front lawn. And it was all black except for the huge yellow lettering on it. And it said something very tiny about a lecture that night, but in at least 12-inch letters in yellow on the black, it said Tom Harper. And underneath it said, the Pagan Christ. And believe me, it just came as a terrific shock because I hadn't had aspirations quite that high. And I said to my wife, I can't wait to hear what I'm going to say. Let me tell you something quite extraordinary that's going on right now in 3 of the world's great religions that I don't think an awful lot of people know very much about. The traditional view of their origins has been shot to pieces, is literally in a shambles. The cutting-edge scholarship today, for example, let us take Judaism. Because of archaeology mainly, but other reasons as well, the traditional view of the history of the way in which the Jewish people became what they are today and have all their traditions, that traditional picture just will not stand the test of scientific observation in the field. For example, the mass exodus under Moses. Moses, incidentally, wasn't a very good guide. He spent 40 years in the wilderness. I've traveled some of that wilderness. And why it would take 40 years to get out of it, I think they must have said, on day 7, say, Moses, didn't we pass that pile of rocks a few days? But anyway, it's because 40 years has nothing to do with it. 40 is the symbolic number of the gestation of the human fetus, 40 weeks of gestation in the womb. Anything in the Bible that's going to gestate and take place and be important takes 40 days. You go through it and look at it. Jesus, 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness. And I could take a lot of time and explain that to you. But there is no record, and we now have records from Egyptian fortifications along the border that shows any mass migration of people out of Egypt, let alone the kind of huge crowd that is described in the book of Exodus. If you take the book of Joshua literally, it's nothing but mayhem and battles as they fight to possess the promised land. Palestine today should be knee-deep in weapons and chariots and all the paraphernalia of war, but it isn't. They cannot find the traces of this exhaustive battle that went on. Abraham, one of the key figures, very difficult to pin down when you come to the archaeological evidence. It has to do with things like camels, which feature in the story of Abraham. But there were no camels in that area at that time or anywhere close to it. And I could go on. It's a huge subject, and it's being bitterly fought over by the minimalists on the one hand, who say that very, very, very little core remains when you're finished. And the others, of course, who are very upset by it. It has enormous implications. It has enormous implications for what's going on in the Middle East right now. You see, if you belong to an ultra-Orthodox party and you really believe God gave this land, every inch of it, to you, then you will even go so far as to kill a leader in Israel who politically decides that he will give back some of that land to people from whom it was taken in more recent times. Because you take the Hebron alone, that's a whole story. But this is a huge and important issue. Now, it's very, very much in the Israeli papers, but you hardly ever see word of it here. Now, let's move to Christianity. You say, well, they were on safer ground, very traditional. We have all that material. Do you know, perhaps you saw, in November, 50 scholars from multiple disciplines, from archaeology to you name it, anything possibly relating to the scientific examination of this particular question. To me, it's a sensational question. If you think this is 2,000 years of tradition that we're looking at, the question is this: can it be, is there evidence, can we establish that there ever was a historical Jesus of Nazareth? That's the project, the Jesus Project. You can Google it. 50 distinguished scholars are going to take 5 years. I recently took part in a documentary in which I was putting my case that I think the evidence for a historical Jesus is extraordinarily thin, so thin as to be virtually not there at all. And on the other side, because this was fair and it was for Vision TV, Moses, we had those who were conservatives and evangelicals putting the other side, naturally. They couldn't bring forth one piece of non-Christian evidence from the first century except for a passage in Josephus, which for 200 years has been known to be an egregious forgery, which mentions Jesus Christ.
When we come back,
Northrop Frye, feet from where we're sitting, used to tell his students regularly and shock them, if there is anything historical in the Bible, it is there by accident. He said, because that's not what it's about.
Get the latest Idealist news, presenter information, and watch streaming video at www.ideacityonline.com. Idea City, the smartest people, the biggest ideas.
The first mention of Jesus Christ in a secular source is in the 2nd century. Now, early in the 2nd century, I grant you. But it amounts to about 20 lines, and it comes from 3 classical authors whom I know very well, whose work I know very well. And this is ambiguity upon ambiguity in what they have to say. I cannot argue the detail here. I've argued it elsewhere. But it is not very much. Now you say we've got 4 Gospels. Yes, but the 4 Gospels are not history. The first thing strikes you when you walk outside this building is a building that has a wonderful name on it, Northrop Frye. Great, distinguished Canadian theologian and literary critic. Northrop Frye, feet from where we're sitting, used to tell his students regularly and shock them, if there is anything historical in the Bible, it is there by accident. He said, because that's not what it's about. It's about a vision. It's about a different way of seeing. It's about the meaning of the human experience, not about the minutiae of history, which is really one damn thing after another. What does it mean? What does our science mean? So that's a huge question I've opened up there. But the question of whether there was a historical Jesus or not is not something you could assume. I meant to mention we have the Gospels, and we don't know who wrote them. We don't know the writer of any one of them. None of them was an eyewitness of Jesus. They all came together in the late 2nd century. They were, some of them actually written before that, but there was no canon of 4 Gospels till about 175 A.D. The point I want to make about them is Northrop Frye's point. They're not about history. If you're looking for biography, this is the strangest biography that ever was, because there are holes in it you could drive a Mack truck through. You don't know what the person looks like. You don't know when they were born. You don't know when they died. There's dispute within the Gospels themselves as to who they really were, as to where their hometown was, as to where they were born. I mean, even Matthew and Luke and the nativity stories don't agree on where Jesus was born. Now, you say, okay, well, that's Judaism and that's Christianity. What about Islam? That's monolithic. Absolutely not. I have been in correspondence for the last year and a half with a distinguished Islamist who is the head of Islamic studies at the University of Munster, which is one of Germany's top universities. His name is Muhammad S. Kalish. You can Google him, Kalish, who is about to publish a book in which he says that the first 200 years of traditional history of Muhammad are totally suspect and don't contain a shred of confirmable, what technical historians would call scientific historical evidence. Religion is mythology misunderstood. That is to say, literalized. Treated as if it were history instead of something about the inner meaning. You see, I like Joseph Campbell's way of putting it. The myth is what never was, but always is. It's talking about the eternal. The eternal in the human condition. The eternal meaning that runs through the flotsam and jetsam and upheavals of history. That is what was of interest to the writers of the Bible. By the way, God is not in the publishing business. And God does not write books. I wish we could get rid of that idea.
When we come back,
At the heart of the human lies the divine. God may be in those far spaces up there and on top, but if you're looking for God, you look in here.
great ideas are meant to be shared. Join the discussion on Facebook. Idea City, the smartest people, the biggest ideas.
God is not in the publishing business, and God does not write books. I wish we could get rid of that idea. People write books. The Dead Sea Scrolls are coming to very close to here. They're wonderful, but they were written by human beings. Inspired? Yes, because the subject they write about is an inspiring one. It's God, the ultimate. But God, I repeat, keep this in mind when you're thinking of timetables for Armageddon. God does not write books. Human beings, very fallible human beings, do. And if I were to give you the list of the number of prophets since the beginning of the Christian era who have stood in some street corner and predicted the time and the day and the way that the world was going to end, it would be longer than one of the longest Dead Sea Scrolls itself. What do we need if we're going to have world peace is really what I want to come to. We need two things. We need a global ethic. We need an ethic that we can all agree on. But there is an ethic that we can't all agree on, that Christopher Hitchens would say yes to, and my atheist philosopher tutor long ago at Oxford could agree with, and any atheist. In fact, you'll find it in humanist organizations and agnostic organizations. It's the golden rule that you do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That is the basis, the leg, one leg, on which I think an approach to global peace can stand. But the second leg is how do you get the power within yourself to love that other person? How do you get the power to transform, to be transformed? I have a book upstairs, Water into Wine. It's about transformation. That's what I think the Christian myth is about. I think it's about transformation. I don't think it's about saving us sick and sad sinners and all of that, and shedding of blood and none of that. I think it's about transforming water into wine the way it happens on the hillsides of every vineyard, every fall, every whenever. The second thing we need, then, is some way of envisioning people that empowers us and that compels us even to see them as the other and as holy. Come back now to mythology very quickly. I got 22 seconds. My research shows that one datum runs through all the great religions, and it's this, very quickly, that at the heart of the human lies the divine. God may be in those far spaces up there and on top, but if you're looking for God, you look in here. St. Augustine said it, everybody said, I have found it. That is what St. Paul says, Christ in you. That was his name for it. Millions of Hindus, as they acknowledge it in the other person, are saying the Atman is that holy in you. If you really believe the divine is in the person next to you in this theater and in every other person, no matter whether they're the Taliban, whoever they may be, you see them differently. It transforms how you look. It says, thanks, I'm quitting. Just let me leave you with this. I love the way it began at the beginning in the semiotics portion, talking about symbols, because symbols are so tremendously important. So I think that with the global ethic and with the global metaphysic, I call it, that view of the divinity within, we need a new sacred symbol. The crosses are fine, the seven-pointed the candelabra are wonderful, all the symbols of Islam, they're all wonderful. The most sacred symbol you had on the screen today, briefly, And it's that shot, the shot made famous by the Apollo crew in 1969 when they took a picture of the Earth from the moon, that kind of oneness, with no walls, no divisions, that kind of unity. If that were at the front of every church and every holy place, I would think it was more sacred than, it would be something that we could all agree on and something that would inspire us all. I think humanity has an amazing future. God bless. Thank you. But I have great faith in our ability to look within and see the resources to meet the incredible risks and dangers and problems that are there, from global warming to nuclear holocaust. Enjoy yourself. Yes, please.